Hello and welcome to PowerServer 2017 Debugger Configuration and Execution for PowerServer Web applications. In this video tutorial for PowerServer Web Debugger, we'll be using the following environment. We'll be running on Windows 10 64-bit operating system, in fact the Fall Creator Edition. We'll be using the traditional PowerBuilder 2017 application, just a standard client server, no special user objects or web APIs. We'll be deploying to a .NET-based 64-bit PowerServer. PowerServer does come in a Java Enterprise Edition as well, but for today, we'll be using the .NET version. We'll be utilizing a PowerServer Toolkits configuration tool. That's the toolkit installed inside the PowerBuilder IDE. We'll be utilizing a SQL Anywhere 64-bit database management system for our test data, and we'll connect to SQL Anywhere from PowerServer through the Open Database Connectivity client. And we'll be using a local deployment model. That means PowerServer, PowerBuilder, the PowerServer Toolkit, and SQL Anywhere, and Internet Explorer are all running on the developer's PC. PowerServer Web Debugger benefits. It allows you to debug a web-based application actually running inside the Internet Explorer web browser. It offers a low learning curve as PowerServer Debugger looks and feels like the actual PowerBuilder IDE debugger. It automatically maps the JavaScript code running in the background inside your Internet Explorer web browser to the PowerScript code that you see inside the PowerBuilder IDE. And it's easy to launch from the PowerServer Toolkit toolbar inside the PowerBuilder IDE when you need this web debugger. You can review and change variables, object property values, watch points, etc. right inside the debugger. And you can revise breakpoints on the fly, just like the PowerBuilder debugger. So PowerServer Debugger installation steps. First thing you need to do is install the Microsoft Script Debugger to the developer PC. Let's have a look at this process right now. You can see here in File Explorer that I've downloaded the Microsoft Script Debugger in a compressed RAR format. I'm going to use the right-hand mouse button and I'm going to extract the files to this current location. You can see here there's an executable install for the Script Debugger. Use the right-hand mouse button and run the install as administrator. Select Yes for the agreement, and it'll actually run the setup. It'll install it into the Microsoft Program Files x86 folder. Press OK and accept the default. And we've now installed the Script Debugger. The next step we need to do is enable the script debugging in Internet Explorer on the developer's PC. To do that, starting the Internet Explorer, go to the top right-hand side to the toolbox icon. Click on that and then select Internet Options. From the Internet Options, go to the Advanced tab, scroll down to the section called Browsing, and you'll see an entry here called Disable Script Debugging. That was on when I came in. Make sure that that check mark is off. Select Apply, and then OK. So that's all you need to do for Internet Explorer. On the third step, we need to reconfigure the PowerServer Toolkit project for debug mode. Let's do that now. Returning back to the PowerBuilder IDE, you can see in the lower toolbar the PowerServer Toolkit functionality. What we need to do is choose the second icon from the left, which is Configuration. In this example of the sales application, you can see that the release mode here is Basic Release. In older versions of the PowerServer Toolkit, we can click on this and we can change that to Debug. In the newer versions, we have to highlight the actual application configuration like I've done already for sales, and then select the Edit button. Once we've done that, notice that we can change the type. Again, for the Web Debugger, make sure that either Web or both is selected. The next selection is the Debug PS.js, which is PowerScript JavaScript. Make sure that this checkbox is checked. This will basically generate a cross-mapping from the PowerScript code to the JavaScript code that's generated for deployment to the web environment. And then select OK. Notice when you return back to the main PowerServer Toolkit configuration for that particular application, the mode release now is Debug PS.js. And then hit OK. So after you've reconfigured the project for debug mode, the next thing you need to do is perform a full deployment of the PowerServer web application. This will basically deploy the application with all the debugging information to the PowerServer itself which will then be pulled in at execution time for analysis by the PowerServer debugger within the Internet Explorer web browser. Let's do this piece now. So returning back to the PowerBuilder IDE, going back to the PowerServer Toolkit, select the Deploy icon on the PowerServer Toolkit toolbar. Entering the sales application again, make sure that you change the deployment mode to a full application deployment. And then select Next. You want to make sure that you replace all the previous user objects that contain the debugging information so that the debugger can interact with those objects at execution time. This will take a minute or so. Once you've completed a deployment, select the Finish button. So after the full deployment, we can now execute the PowerServer debugger against your web application, just as if you would within the PowerBuilder IDE running a native version of the application. Let's try that now. So returning back to the PowerBuilder IDE, let's have a look, for example, at the native Windows application. Most of us are used to, for example, going to a specific script in either an event or a function, and you can set breakpoints like we've done here. And again, use the right-hand mouse button here and we can clear the breakpoint, and then we can use the right-hand mouse button again and insert a breakpoint anywhere in our script. And then execute, select and debug. Then select Start the Debugger. So you notice now as soon as we start the application, we're at the point just before we do the connect using the transaction object. And again, in the secondary toolbar, we can continue, step into the command, step over it, step out of this particular section. We can set the next statement to execute, and then we can run from where we are to that statement that we set. For now, I'm just going to basically continue to the next breakpoint. And here we have the sales application demo. I'm going to select the login button. Notice that I have a breakpoint on the if statement here and the login button. And that shows me here in the breakpoint tab page all the breakpoints that I have. In the bottom lower pane, I can actually have a look at the tabs for local variables, global, instance variables, etc. And again, if I actually double click any of them, I can change those particular properties of the variables or the object themselves. In the breakpoints, I can add more breakpoints. I can see the calling stack. I can create watch variables by using the right-hand mouse button and insert watch points so I can watch when a particular variable has a certain value. So for now, let's pretend that that's the end of our native debugging. Again, for safety reasons, always make sure that you, if you don't exit the application, hit the Stop Debugging first before you exit the debugger, with it to the close. So now what I'm going to do is do exactly the same thing using the PowerServer web debugger. Notice in the secondary toolbar we have an application debugger, which is called the Appeon debugger. We're going to highlight the application we'd like to debug. And you can see here that this debugger looks and feels very similar to the PowerBuilder IDE debugger. Again, we can go here in the open event and we can basically select and deselect different breakpoints. You can select here in the objects, different objects that you want and different scripts. And again, you can use the right-hand mouse button, look at the source, add or subtract breakpoints, which you see here in the lower right-hand pane. So once the basic breakpoints have been set, you can hit the Start Debug icon on the left-hand side. So the application is actually started. We see the first breakpoint, which we're right here on the connect. And of course, if we go to the global variables, we can see the transaction object SQLCA, and we can see actually what happens here as we execute the connect. And we can do that, for example, by stepping over this command. So once the connect is done, we'll see that the yellow arrow moves to the next statement, and we can check the return code in the SQLCA and see that the connect was actually successful. I'm going to continue on at this point to the next breakpoint. Here's the login screen, and I select the login button. Notice on the top here of the debugger, it says we're actually in the clicked event of the picture object plogin within the window wlogin. And we're basically right here in checking the actual password and login ID at this point. So we can see here if we actually hit the continue button that we can continue to the next breakpoint, or we can step in or step over the command. In this case, I'm stepping over so I can actually look to see what happened if the if was actually executed and what actually transpired. Notice again on the lower hand side we can see local variables. If you double click them, just like the PowerBuilder IDE debugger, you can change the values of any particular variable or an object property. We can see the call stack, we can see the breakpoints, and if we want, we can use the right-hand mouse button and we can add more watch points if we'd like, or clear the watch points altogether. So just like the PowerBuilder IDE debugger in native mode, we can actually run the application and debug it exactly the same within the Internet Explorer web browser. Again, just like the PowerBuilder debugger, if you exit the application, the debugger will automatically stop. However, if you want to stop the debug session, don't just close the debugger. Hit the stop button first, then hit the close. That's the safe way to actually shut the application down and the debugger safely. So congratulations! You've now successfully installed and utilized the PowerServer web debugger. Thanks for watching.